Hi, my name is Vivek Agarwal. I am one of the directors here at Masai School. So, even this year, React remains to be one of the most in demand technologies in the front end. And that is the reason we spend more than 1 month in our curriculum trying to help our students master these amazing technologies. Yet, today in this master class, which is even shorter than our single typical class, I will attempt to teach you React. And at the same time, we will be building this amazing weather app. So let me walk you through the application. So you can search for any city. For example, I want to search the current weather information of Surat. I can type Surat, hit search button, and I have the current weather information of Surat. There are some commonly searched cities. So for example, if I search for Chennai, I see Chennai. You can see that there is a light intensity drizzle there, and this particular icon is corresponding to the current weather condition. Also, this is the current temperature, and we see 3 days forecast, what the minimum and the maximum temperature is estimated to be. So friends, yes, we'll be learning React from scratch, and in the process, by the end of this particular master class, you will be ready. You would have built yourself step by step this very real world weather application. Everything that I teach you today will be included in a Notion document, in this lovely Notion document, so that you can revise whatever you have learned in like just a few minutes, right? Also, I'll be giving you a lot of practice exercises to enforce your learnings, right? To make your theoretical knowledge a practical one, right? So all the links to all those code pens and different exercises and source code, everything will be included in this one single Notion document. So friends, we will be learning React from scratch, but I do expect you to know a little bit of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Okay, in JavaScript, especially the ES6 concepts, right? Like arrow functions, template literals using backticks, right? Destructuring using arrays, objects, spread operators, right? So these are a few things, array.map, array.reduce. So these are a few things which are, we can consider as a gentle prerequisite to take this course. It's out of scope. First of all, in Masai school, when we teach the MERN stack, we spend almost one entire month learning React. And now we will be having a short interaction, a short session of around maybe, just a couple of hours, right? So already we have a very short duration of time, so it's out of scope for this particular class that it's literally not possible for me to cover all of these JavaScript ES6 concepts. So yeah, ensure that you know a little bit of that before you begin with this course. Rest about React, we'll be learning everything from scratch. Okay, so friends, I've taught React to all kind of people, from all background and from all different experience levels, right? And if I see someone struggling with React, the major reason is that they don't know the shift in mindset that they have to make while learning React. How are things fundamentally different in React from vanilla JavaScript? I hope it's making sense to you. So there are just a couple of things, 2-3 things. If you understand them, the entire React journey will become very, very easy and meaningful to you. And maybe, just this one small bit of information today can be a game changer, can be, can take your React skills to a very different level. Okay, so let's see. In plain JavaScript, friends, suppose you have a div with an ID of root in HTML, and you need to write some plain JavaScript to append this particular HTML structure inside of that. So div with an ID of root, and inside of that you have h1 with a class of page title in blue, and the text, inner text, I love JavaScript. How would you do it? So friends, in the notes, and you'll find these notes somewhere in the comment section or the description. So I have given this problem code pen and the solution code pen, right, to this. So if you open the problem, you have a div with an ID root. This root is just a random, ID I decided to give. And you have, someplace a script tag where you can write some JavaScript. So how would you do that? Right? The target is to add this bunch of HTML, right? A div with an ID of root, inside of that an h1 nested. And you need to place this entire thing inside of the root. How would you do that? Again, if you were in live class, I would have given you an opportunity to pause for a few seconds and try it yourself. And I'll really encourage you to pause the video and try to do it yourself. So solution would look something like this, friends. You would create an element using document.createElement and maybe store it in a variable if you're kind enough to yourself. Then you will add some inner HTML to the title, right, which is I love JavaScript as per the problem statement. You will add some classes to it, and finally you would append that to the root. You would most probably write this sort of code, right? So friends, now very important, even though this looks very simple, with every line of code that you wrote, हर एक line code जो आपने लिखा, you are communicating something to the JavaScript engine, right? For example, you are telling, hey JavaScript, create an h1 element and store it in a variable called title. So you are giving step-by-step instruction to JavaScript. Then you are telling JavaScript that, hey JavaScript, set inner HTML property of that title to be I love JavaScript. Are you getting what I'm saying? And this is very important, because this is our mental model. This is our mentality when we are working with vanilla JavaScript. And this is going to drastically change when you're working with React. So it's very important, although it sounds very simple. But, these are foundation knowledge which will really which will start your journey, towards becoming a React genius. Okay. Then you are telling, add classes so-and-so to title, and finally append title to the root. So this is something that you are communicating in each line, with each line of code that you have written to JavaScript. Cool? Now let's see how will I do the same thing in React. Now just for this particular exercise, you don't need to understand what I've written. You just need to understand what am I trying to communicate with React. So here I am communicating something with JavaScript directly, and I'm giving it step-by-step instruction. Now let's look at the React code and let's try to make sense of what we are trying to communicate with React. You can see, friends, the problem statement here is exactly the same. right? But there is one very big difference to this particular template. And yeah, you will be able to find all of these templates in the Notion document. You basically, if I just inspect it, right, I have access to two amazing objects. One is React. In case of CodePen, I have to use the console of CodePen. So you will see that I have access to this amazing object called React, and another one is React DOM. Right. So basically, I used this particular CDN called unpackage.com to load React and React DOM in this particular CodePen so that we can use them. And the problem statement remains exactly the same. I need to append, the same div with same heading and I love JavaScript text within it, right? And let's see. So this is just a boilerplate code, and let's see how will we do the exact same thing in React. Okay. So if you look at the code here, the solution here, friends, this is what we would be doing apart from the boilerplate code. Okay. We are writing something like exactly what we need: an H1 tag with certain classes and certain text within it. An amazing, astonishing difference, right? Just imagine, friends, let's look at the code side by side maybe. So this is the code with vanilla JavaScript, and this is the code with React. Now, what is the difference that you notice? What is the difference that we notice? First is what we are communicating with React. So here we are telling, hey React, just give me what I need, give me an H1 tag with so and so classes with so and so text. This is what I need. Just give me this. How you do this step by step is your problem, not my problem. Are you getting the difference, friends? So let's compare the JavaScript approach with the React approach. Okay. So in JavaScript, we are telling JavaScript to create H1 element and store it in a variable called title. Set inner HTML property of the title to I love JavaScript. Add so and so classes. So we are giving step by step instructions. This mode of coding, this way of coding is called imperative way of coding. And in React, we are just telling React what I need, and React takes care of everything else. So I'm just telling React to give me what I want, right? And this is called declarative way of programming. So I'm just declaring what I need, and React library, this amazing library, is taking care of everything else. Is it starting to make sense, right? Why you need a shift, why you need a different mental model, why you need a different way of thinking to work with React, right? So a very important concept, friends, imperative versus declarative way of writing code. In the imperative way, you give step-by-step instructions to the engine. You are telling how to do something, right? In the declarative way of coding, you simply tell, I need this, right? Wonderful, right? Again, this is a beautiful problem, right? So I'll really encourage you, I'll explain you the problem, and the problem CodePen and the solution CodePen. I provided both of them for all of you, so that you can really practice, immerse, and really get good at React. So friends, if you see this code, again, this is vanilla JavaScript, no React here, right? So now the problem is that if you hit like button, you will see that the value of count is changing. So here you have a variable called count, and in an imperative way you are putting this count inside of h1 as a text of h1 right here. And when you are hitting the button, when you are clicking the button, the count is increasing. That is evident from the comments, right? On every click the count is increasing, but the UI is not in sync with the count variable. So count variable is definitely increasing on every click. So just take a few seconds to go through the code, right? So here, again, it's very straightforward. It's simple HTML JavaScript. So we have a count variable. We are, displaying it here in this particular element. On click of the button, or whenever we click the like button, the count is increasing, because when we log out count, you can see that the count is increasing, right? But the UI is not refreshing. ये like तो अभी भी 1 का 1 है, although the value of count keeps on changing. Now what's the problem here? How would you solve it in plain vanilla JavaScript? So essentially the problem with vanilla JavaScript, or the way we deal with this UI and variable synchronization in vanilla JavaScript is that we have to do it manually. So essentially, whenever the value of count is going to change, we have to take care of updating or refreshing or resetting the UI. So here what I did was that I again set I set the inner HTML again here manually to the new value of count, and as soon as I do that, I see that the UI is now refreshing. Again, the reason I am showing you this very, very, very simple example is that in plain vanilla JavaScript, this is how we think, this is how we solve problems, that we the engineers, we the developers, we are responsible for keeping the UI in sync with the variable. So this is something that we have to take care of. Now let's see how we do the same thing in React. I really don't expect you to understand this code. I just want you to acquire the mindset, the mental models that you need in order to master React. Okay. So somehow React gave me a way to create a variable called count. What are these things? We'll see. In fact, in today's class itself, again, we spend entire month during our curriculum. We spend entire month on React, and this is just a very short. This is not even one full class, right? So don't expect everything. But yeah, I promise you that I'll put my best efforts to give you as much knowledge as possible. Okay, but yeah, definitely there are lots of other things as well, right, to React. So again, we will look into how we do this, but React gave me a mechanism to create a variable called count and a function, a way to set the value of count. I am displaying the count variable here, and on click, I am setting the count. That is, I'm just incrementing the count. And React takes care of keeping the UI in sync with the value of the variable, the special variable count. See, all we did was React gave us a way to create this very special variable. It's also called state, right? So a very special variable count, It gave me a way to set the value of count. Now, in something that almost looks like HTML, I am putting in the count, this count. On click of button, I'm just incrementing the count. I'm doing nothing to sync our UI with the count, right? This thing is done by React. Very important second thing that React tries to do for us. It's that React takes care of keeping the UI in sync with the state. And it gives us a mechanism to create a very special variable which we call state. Wonderful, isn't it? So first thing, in React, it's a declarative way of writing code. We don't give step-by-step instruction like vanilla JavaScript. We tell it what we need and it takes care. The React library takes care of the step-by-step things. Second thing, React gives us a mechanism to create a very special variable called state. It gives us a way to set the value of the state. And wherever we use the state in our React application, we don't have to worry about keeping the UI in sync with the state or the variable. React takes care of keeping the user interface in sync with that special variable. Lovely, right? Third thing, React application is basically a component which is made up of more components, which is made up of maybe more components, and those components are again made up of more components. So for example, this React, this Twitter page, it's a React application. The complete page, the entire page is a React application, which is made up of several more components. So this entire thing is a component, which is made up of more components. Let's see. I've created a short animation so that it makes a little bit more sense to you. So I'll just open this. So friends, this application is built up of this navigation component, a search component, a you might like component, a what's happening component, a feed component, and feed is made up of several tweet components. Do you see this, friends? App is made up of lots of different components. Is the animation making sense to you, friends? Just look at it carefully. Now, feed is made up of lot of tweets, and individual tweets are also made up of different components. Let's see this. I've also created a very nice animation to make to give it a bit more visual meaning to it. So again, a Twitter feed is made up of lots of tweets, and let's see a tweet itself. We'll just give it a moment to load. So a tweet is made up of maybe a profile image, a username, a handle, date of post, some text, the tweet itself, and a couple of buttons with icons. Do you see this? One tweet is again made up of lots of components. So again, if I move back to the first one, so the entire thing, the entire application is a React component, and yes, Twitter is made using React, the UI of Twitter, and it is made up again of several smaller components, which are again made of smaller components. So this is the way we build a huge application, something like Twitter. So we have lots of smaller components. We compose them to form bigger components. We compose them to form even bigger components. And this makes coding so much more fun and maintaining a React app so much more fun, right? Again, this will make a little bit more sense once we start writing some React. But friends, this knowledge of three major differences, the three shift in your mindset, will just be a game changer for all of you, because you know that React is trying to make life of we developers much easier. So you have to drop the mindset of vanilla JavaScript and adopt an altogether different level of mindset. So this is kind of a rough overview of components that makes up Twitter. And usually this is represented in the form of a tree. So we have an app which is made of navigation, feed, search. Feed is made up of tweet components. Tweet is made up of avatar, handle, likes, and different components. So usually, and during the Masai curriculum, we practice this a lot, that creating a tree representation in your mind whenever you see an application, and then starting with the code. So you can build, you can divide a problem. You can literally divide and conquer, right? So it's a gigantic Twitter application, but ultimately it's built of lots of small, manageable, very small components. So React encourages component-driven development. So while developing React application, we develop lots of components. Okay. So now the question comes, what is React? I have given you an overview. I have given you the change in the mindset that you need to bring. So what is React now? So it's a library. It's the JavaScript library written by Facebook, for building user interfaces. So it's a tool set for you to create user interfaces out of it, right? So it helps us use JavaScript to build modern and reactive user interfaces for the web. And it makes the process of creating this reactive user interfaces more fun using a declarative and component-focused approach. So using these three different, differences, you can come up with your own very nice definition of React, right? Lovely. Now let's try to make a little bit more sense of the code, right? The React code that we write. So friends, again, as I told you, it's much easier to inspect things in browser directly as compared to CodePen, etc. So I have this very simple local setup, plain HTML and JavaScript, no React, no setup for React, right? All I'm doing is I'm loading React and React DOM here. Okay, so if I check it in the console, I should be having React. I should be having React DOM. So which line of code is responsible for bringing these? Is this available to all the websites? So if I open a new page, say Google, and if I inspect it, so will React be available here? No, right? So by default, React is not available in the browser. But what these two lines, line number 11 and 12 is doing is they are giving us these beautiful React and React DOM object to the JavaScript that we write here. Cool? Okay. Now we have written, if you see the script tag here, so what we are doing here is we are creating an app. Okay. We are creating a variable and we are giving it a label of app, which is just a function that returns something that looks like JavaScript. So what is this? So basically, in a declarative way, we are asking, we know that we are asking React to give us a div with a class of container. But this is JavaScript, right? स्क्रिप्ट के अंदर तो हम जावास्क्रिप्ट लिखते हैं, राइट? बट हियर यू सी समथिंग दैट लुक्स लाइक HTML, बट इट्स नॉट एग्जैक्टली HTML, क्योंकि HTML में तो हम क्लास लिखते हैं कीवर्ड एट्रीब्यूट के लिए. हियर इट्स क्लास नेम. So friends, this is something that browser probably would not understand. So basically what JavaScript does is what React does is it tries to give us a declarative way of writing our UI. So one part of the problem is solved, that we as developer, we just need to tell it what we need with slight changes in the syntax. We will see that almost literally we are telling it what we need. But how to make JavaScript understand this? JavaScript does not understand this something which is JavaScript but looks like HTML, which looks like a combination of HTML and maybe JavaScript, which is actually called JSX. So that's why we need something like Babel. So what Babel does is it converts this bit of code to something that our browser can understand. Let me show you an example. So if I Google Babel JSX to JS, you will be able to see a kind of REPL, or maybe I may consider writing REPL here. So you can see here babel.js, and if I open here, I'm inside of try it out, and now I'll paste in this exact same code here. ये same जो JSX code है, I'll just put it here inside of try it out and see what we get. We are getting something that looks more like JavaScript. So you are, it's making call to something like _JSX. It's asking it to create a div. It's passing, basically it looks like a method, it looks like a function. Usme the first argument is maybe the type of element that we need, maybe a div element, maybe we need this. And then we are giving it some extra information, like we need some class name, and we need some children, right? So this looks like something that browser would be able to understand. And this surely comes from React. And React knows what to do with it, and what it does is it gives us exactly what we need. So again, if I inspect it, you will see that I have a div here, right? And I have a class called container here. Do you see this? I have this inner text called hello world. So React took care of all of these. So again, what happened here? We wrote code in a very, declarative way. Babel, before sending it to browser, or maybe, before rendering it for us, it transformed it to something that browser can actually understand, right? And then React took over, and it gave us what we exactly need. It did all the DOM manipulation that we needed. Okay? So under the hood, what ._JSX is doing, it's actually calling a function called method called react.create component. React.create element. So we write this kind of code, and some transpilers like Babel, it converts them to this kind of a code. It's not fun to write this kind of a code, right? But still, it makes sense to understand how React works a little bit under the hood, so that when you write JSX, you know exactly what React is doing. So in future, in case you encounter any problems, any errors, you know where it might be coming from, right? So again, let's try to understand React.createElement. So here is the code. So let me replace this JSX with React.createElement, right? So again, you see that it's working exactly as it is expected to work. जैसे JSX काम कर रहा था वैसे ही it's working, right? So we are basically, again in an imperative way to browser, because we are communicating in plain JavaScript, not JSX. We are asking React to create an element. The type of element is going to be div, so it's doing its work properly. It's going to have a children or an inner text called hello world 2. Again, it has done that beautifully. Again, it has a nice class name of hello. So again, we are able to, recreate what we created using JSX, using React.createElement. Now we notice that there are some slight, difference between the way we write JSX and the plain HTML. So one very significant difference that you saw was that if we were writing plain JavaScript, I'll just copy it so that we can play around with it and take reference of it here. So यहाँ पे what I do is I just paste it. So this is normally how we would write this particular component in React. Okay, we'll just write everything just the way we need it, just like HTML. But instead of class equals to container, we have to use class name equals to container. So instead of blindly doing what is asked to us, it makes sense to know why we need to write class name instead of class, right? Because ultimately this line of code is going to be converted as this object or this entire piece of code. And if it was class here, this object, this key of the object would become a class, which is not possible because class is a reserved keyword in JavaScript, right? You cannot make it the name of the key of an object, right? So that's why React uses class name. Now, from where did it come up with class name? Again, it's not random, right? So again, if you let me create a simple example that has nothing to do with React. Okay, so I'll just create a quick code pen. I'll create a new pen, and here I'll write HTML में div with a class of hello. Okay, so we have a nice div with a class of greetings, with a class of hello. Okay, now in the JavaScript, let me log out console.log. No, we don't really need console.log. We don't really need it. उसके लिए we'll have to take a reference of get element by class and all of that. We don't need that. We'll just inspect it, and you see a $0 here, right? यहाँ पे आप एक $0 देख रहे हैं. So let me go to the console. And in the console, if I type $0, because that particular div is selected, right? So you see this. Now what I want to do is I want to see it as a directly, right? I want to see it directly, not so here basically the developer tool is trying to be very friendly to us, but I want to see it in a more raw form. So I'll log it directly $0. Let's see if it works. I'm not sure if it would work. Yeah. So here I see it in a more of a DOM representation, the more of a object representation. Here it's the way we wrote it in the HTML, and here the way it's stored in JavaScript, right? The DOM representation, the object representation. And let's see again, here there is no role of React here. It's just plain DOM, right? Plain HTML JavaScript. And if you try to find classes here, you will again see that internally they store it as class name, right? So that's why React team decided to use class name instead of class in their JSX. Okay, so basically there are a couple of small little differences. We will look into all of them, most of them, and it will slowly start to make a lot of sense to us. Okay, again, I'm showing you this and it will make sense to you why I am showing you and talking about React.create element. Even though we are not going to write it directly, it will make sense to you in just a moment. Okay, so just bear with me. So friends, you can see that we are passing in children here, and we can pass many children. We can just pass an array of lots of children. So for example, instead of this, what I can do is I can pass in lots of children, in an array. So hello world, anything, right? Good, maybe greetings. And if I save it, friends, you will see that all of these children are here, right? Hello world, greetings. All of these are inside of our div with class hello. Now, notice one thing again, it's okay if it does not make complete sense to you right now. It will make sense in a moment. First of all, React.create element needs one element to begin with, है ना? यहाँ पे there is no way to send multiple elements, right? एक div से या कोई भी एक from one element it starts, but it can have any number of children, And the most important part is that it can have a React component as a children. So I have created an element, React.create element. I have created this element. It has children, and it can have more elements as children. So for example, it's very much possible to do this. So we are creating another element. It's really interesting, and it is something that makes component-driven development possible. I'll just readjust the screen so that I can demo it to you easily, and I'm not sure why it's not letting me do that. Okay, so if you see here, friends, it's still not letting me do that. Let me try from here. Okay, I'll not spend time there. So friends, basically we are creating an element which has children, and one of its children is a React element, right? So we are creating a strong element with children hello, and then we're passing in some text like world and greetings to div. And if you see this, we have a div with class hello. So we have a div with class hello here. It has a couple of children. One of the children is again a React element of type strong with children or text hello, and more children world and greetings, right? So there can be a React element, and there can be multiple nested childrens which are React elements, right? How will we write this exact same thing using JSX? JSX mein how would we do? So how would we do the exact same thing in a more declarative way? Again, it's very simple, friends. Let's try it out. So what I'll do is I'll just copy it and just put it here for reference. And I would make it very, very declarative and easy. So we need a div with class name hello, है ना, and उसके अंदर hello world greetings, and hello should be a strong hello, and if I save it, we can see that we have the exact same result as this, but in a much more declarative and nice way. Okay, just one difference that we have come across so far is, instead of class we use class name, and I have shown you, although it was not important for you to know that, I guess 90% of React engineers don't know that, but now you know that, why we use class name instead of class. So this is one small difference, but just see the amount of effort it has reduced for us. Do you see the magic of JSX here? Do you see why JSX is such a game changer for writing declarative and nice reactive UI? So you are just telling React what you need and you are getting it. But remember, friends, what Babel does is it transpiles this particular JSX to this kind of React.create element, a simple JavaScript. So it transpiles this JSX, JavaScript plus HTML like syntax to plain JavaScript, and then browser and the React library together does all the magic for you. Quite important for you to know this. So moving ahead with the notes, ahead with the flow of the document that I have provided to you, friends. So now let's see, a little bit more about JSX. In particular, we want to see about a concept called interpolation. Again, interpolation is nothing but, and I'll just get rid of all of these extra code. So again, I'll give you a trick which will make this very easy for you. So think of this entire thing as JSX land. Okay, this entire thing is JSX land, and inside of this JSX land you can write any JavaScript expressions. For example, if this is a console, right? Inside of console you can write 5 plus 5. This is a valid JavaScript expression, right? You get back the answer 10, right? You can write maybe a ternary operator, right? That's a JavaScript expression, right? So 5 more than 4, then type G greater than, else you know, uh, lesser than, right? So again, this is an expression which evaluates to something. This is an expression that evaluates to something, right? These are all valid JavaScript expressions. Even map, right? Map is a valid JavaScript expression, isn't it? So this map, we have an array, and we are using dot map, which is doing nothing but giving us a new array in which each item is multiplied by 3, right? It's again an expression. It's evaluating to something, right? So how to write or use any JavaScript expression within JSX? So for that, we have single curly brackets, right? So for example, I can have a curly bracket here anywhere inside of JSX, and this area in between the curly brackets becomes my JavaScript land. So this entire thing is JSX land, or you may like to call it HTML land, and here we have our JavaScript land, and here you can write literally any expression. So let's try out a couple of them. Let's see, 5 plus 5, right? And if I save it, friends, see what we get here. See what we get here, 10. So this expression evaluated before being sent to the DOM. So if I inspect it, so we see this expression was evaluated for us. So we can literally write any JavaScript expression inside of JSX. Now this is again a very useful feature which we would be using in our application a lot. So although I have given you a nice explanation of JSX, how it transpiles and everything, but the confidence would develop only when you practice it a little bit, right? So in the notes you will find that I have given lots of simple JSX practice exercises. You can spin up a code pen, code sandbox, or anything, or maybe Visual Studio Code, and I would encourage you to practice these. So for example, you have a user object, right, with first name, last name, and age, and you need to display full name inside of JSX. How would you do that? So you are telling React that I need div, and inside of div, user first name, a little bit of space, then user last name, and whatever the text is. So these kind of small little practice things, again, I told you that you can use ternary operators, right? It's just an expression, so you can use curly brackets for this. So yeah, I'll encourage you to pause for a moment and ensure that you practice these JSX exercises. We have a limitation of time, right? Else, I would have given you plenty of time to practice these. We have to cover almost a lot of content in a very squeezed amount of time today. So but so definitely, if you spare a little bit of time practicing it, it will definitely help you a lot. Now look at this piece of code properly, So inside of app, we are returning a div, and inside of that, lots of more divs. All of them has a class of user, and they are from someone. So a greeting from Vivek, a greeting from Preeti, a greeting from Albert. So basically, we are displaying some user information of 3 different users do you see a problem with these lines of code? So the very first principle that it's breaking is that it's not dry, right? So there is a lot of repetition, like class, user, the div, the kind of element, then the structure. So again, I want to introduce you to the next and very important concept in React, which is reusing components. So what we want to be doing is we want to create a component in such a way that we would be using the exact same component to display all of these three different information. Okay, so let's attempt it. So let's create a component, so called maybe user component. Okay, and that's going to be a function, and this is basically a React functional component. Okay, just a function, a normal function that returns some JSX. So to simplify it, a function that returns some JSX is a React functional component. As simple as that, friends. Okay. Now, let me return some JSX from here. Let's see if we can use this exact same thing here. So from this function user, I am returning this JSX. Okay, so this is a nice separate component, one component, and this is another component, because here again we have a function which returns some JSX, right? Now, how can I include this user component that I've just created here? Again, it's very simple, friends. I open the curly bracket, I open the angle bracket, use user just like any other HTML element, and close the tag. And if I save it, friends, you see that we have exact same result. But what I have done is I have moved the code from here to a separate React component called user, and then I'm using that user component here. Very important fundamental React concept, right? Second step, again, I can use this user as many number of times, but there is no point in showing the same data again and again, right? If the data inside of here, this function, is like hard-coded, for example, this greeting is hard-coded, this name is hard-coded, then it's not much use, right? We have just moved code from here to here. So how do you make a function more reusable, more customizable? Using arguments, right? So yeah, we can send, so for example, if you have a normal function, so you have a function called do calculation. It takes in two numbers, maybe 1 and 2, right? And you return maybe n1 plus n2. Again, I'm giving a simple JavaScript example to make a little bit more sense of the concept we are talking about. But if you give it another argument called operation, so now you can make it much more reusable, right? So if the operation is plus, then you can return something else. If the operation is minus, then you can return, apply a different formula. Similarly, here, while invoking doCalc, you can specify the operation you need, right? Plus, minus, whatever you need, right? So you can do a very similar thing with React. And instead of arguments, it's called props. You can set or send different props. So let's see how to do that. So inside of user, I can, I'm invoking the function here. Think of it like a function that we created here. And I'm sort of invoking it here just to explain you the concept of props, and I'm passing in these arguments or props. So let's name it user name, and the username I would pass here is Vivek, or maybe let's say Ram, and greeting would be equal to maybe namaste. Okay. So while using this user component, I called it with a couple of props like username and greeting. How to make use of this here? So just like function, I get them here and I can name it anything, right? Whatever, maybe, whatever. No, not whatever. I'll maybe name it X, right? I'll store whatever I'm receiving from here as X. And now I'll console log it. I'll just remove these two users for a moment. And now let's console log to see what we get here. Okay. So now you will see, friends, something very interesting. All the props that we sent, username, greeting, right? You see them inside of an object here. So you can see username and its value Ram, username and its value Ram. You see greeting and its value namaste. You see greeting and its value namaste inside of here. So this is the way you are invoking user with different arguments. To be more precise, you are using a React component and passing it props, right? And here is how you get it. You get all of these here. And usually these are called props. I just used X to tell you that, you don't have to use the word prop. It's a simple object. Whatever string you write here, this object, points to this. You can use this object using whatever variable you type here, right? So here, using props.greeting, I can get access to namaste. Using props.username, I can get access to Ram. Is it making sense to all of you? So now I know that I have this nice object and it has these nice properties. How can I make Vivek dynamic? I want Vivek to be coming from props, not hard-coded. So I need to write some JavaScript, right? And how do you write JavaScript inside of JSX? Using single curly brackets. And here I can directly write props dot username, right? How can I make this greeting dynamic? Single curly bracket, props dot greeting, right? And now if I save it, you see namaste from Ram. So this is a reusable component called user. It makes use of props. So that's why I can reuse it and customize it, call it with different props, use it with different props, right? So again, user component, I can use Vivek and hello. Similarly, for Preeti and Albert, I can do the same thing, friends. Preeti, greeting, hi. Albert, hola. And friends, you see that we have the exact same result, but now we created a component. Now we created a component and reused the same user component by passing in different props. So you've learned two very important concepts in last 10 minutes. One, you can create a reusable component and you can make it flexible by the use of props. Right? So friends, there is a better way of destructuring the object. So this is nothing but an object with these two properties, right? So I can avoid this props dot everywhere I use it. So basically, let me teach it to you step by step. So if I want to destructure the props, so for example, I want to store the greeting and username into variable called greeting and a variable called username. Again, this is a JavaScript concept, nothing to do with React. So I have an object called props and I can store its property greeting and its property username here, right? And so now I don't need to use this props dot anymore. Again, this is a pure JavaScript concept, so I'm not going too much into depth of it, and I see the exact same result. Basically, what I've done here in this line of code is I have stored the greeting property of props object and the username property of the props object in these two variables so that I can use them directly, right? And you can do this directly here instead of doing this in a separate line. You can do it directly here, and this looks so much more concise. We are making full use of the power of ES6, and this is the way you will see React components written a lot in the industry. I've used these step-by-step examples. I've kept them in the notes for you so that you can refer to them. So basically, I am creating a component called user here. I'm invoking or I'm using user with these props, username and greeting. So these are available to us in an object called prop. In an object here, we can call that anything, or we cannot call it anything. We can destructure it here directly. So we have the greeting property and the username property of the props that it receives, and then I can use it directly inside of my component. So this is the most standard way. This is the way most React components are written in the industry. So it's important for you to be comfortable with this type of code. Again, if you're not very clear with destructuring, it may take you a little bit of time to understand it. I'll suggest that you pause the video and practice it before moving ahead. So now we will continue with our journey of learning React. But now we'll change the gears a little bit and we will build parts of our weather app. And in the process, we'll also be learning new things. Okay, so we'll be using the knowledge that we have gained so far. Plus, we'll be building small parts of our weather app. and maybe learning a couple of new things. Cool. So the very first task for you is, again, I would encourage to, all of these notes and problem statements are provided to you via notes. Very useful. So I would encourage, read the problem statement carefully, what is expected. You don't need to worry about styles. See, because we are learning React, we have a very limited time as well. I'm focusing solely on React. I'm trying to minimize dependencies as much as possible, right? So we are just focusing on React. So I provided all the instructions that you need to do. You need to create a component called app. Inside this component, render a div with this class name. Inside of weather app, render another div with this class. Then inside this div, render an input with so and so input. Then render a button with a span inside of it that should contain this class icon. I mean, all the instructions are provided to you, and so far, whatever is required from this activity, this exercise, this practice, we have learned everything, right? And I've also given the HTML structure so that you don't have to spend time on these things, right? This is ultimately what we want to be rendered to the browser. We'll be writing React code. And we would be expecting this. So if you want to practice it really, and which I'll highly encourage, I have provided you a problem code pen as well. So here is the problem code pen. So everything is included here, friends. I have included all the CSS. You don't need to write any CSS here. The HTML just contains the root. And here is the boilerplate code. Now, friends, here in this particular code pen, again, I've worked very hard to create this. This is very nice and convenient for these quick exercises, these student activities, for interactive sessions, quick demos. You have everything you need for React here already. So if you click on the gear icon, you see this React in browser, right? So I have created this node library, npm library, and using this, you have React here. So you can just create app and just use it, right? So very, very useful for the thing. And, just try to implement this all by yourself. Maybe take a few minutes to implement this and then compare it to the solution that I'll be walking you through. In our live classes, we usually type the solution. We like to type the solution out. Here, because of the time constraints, I have already typed the solution. I'll be walking you through the solution more, but I'll be ensuring to walk you through all the lines of code. Okay, so yeah, I'll encourage you to take a few seconds, a few minutes, and try to do it yourself. Let me quickly walk you through the solution. Again, what is a React component? Basically, it's a function that returns some JSX, right? So here we have a function called app. Again, app is a React component which we are rendering to the root, and it returns some JSX. Again, React is a declarative way of writing code. React embraces the declarative way of writing code, right? So here, basically, if you see, it's exactly same, almost same as the problem statement. And this is, friends, the beauty of React, right? So this looks so similar to this. So we have a class name, we have a div, we have given it a class name of weather app. Inside of that, we have another div which has a class name of search box. Inside of search box, we have an input with certain class name, some placeholder text, and we have a button. Inside of button, we have a span and a glass icon. As simple as that. Almost identical to the HTML structure that was already provided to us, right? That's the power of declarative programming. So this is your first React component that you have created from scratch, and it required such minimal efforts, right? I've also provided the solution code pen here. Feel free to play around and explore it, right? So I have made it a complete guide so that you can use this guide to really get comfortable with React. I totally understand that in this limited amount of time, for some of you it may be too much, right? So hopefully these notes, the efforts that I've put into these notes, will help you practice it and get comfortable with it, friends. Another thing that I would like to do now is move from CodePen and online editors to a real setup, right? And that's fairly simple, especially using Vite. It's very, very easy. Just Google Vite React and click on maybe the first link that you find. So it supports, so it's a build tool, right, that aims to provide a faster and leaner development experience. And I can assure you that at the time of this recording, this is the fastest build tool that's available in the market. Again, just go through the requirements. You need Node to be installed in your system, and if you just do a quick Google, you'll find lots of tutorials teaching how to install Node in your system. After installing Node, you have to install Vite globally using npm install Vite -G, right? So once you have Vite and Node installed, all you need is run this command. So again, I'll just create a folder called React Easy 2 maybe. Okay, I'll just open it in the Visual Studio Code. I'll open the built-in terminal, the integrated terminal that comes with Visual Studio Code. Okay, and here all I need to do is npm create Vite @latest. Okay, again, friends, you need Node in your system. Second, you need to install Vite globally, npm install Vite -G. That will install the Vite globally. Again, there are lots and lots of lessons available online for that, so I decided not to, include that here. Again, it's asking for a project. We can name it maybe weather app, and we want React and simple JavaScript may React. Okay, and now if I can cd into the weather app, and if I see the instructions, after seeding into the project, I need to do npm install, then npm run dev. And a more reliable or real-time place to look for it is package.json. So you see that you have npm run dev, which runs the Vite. And of course, you have to do npm install inside of weather app for all of these dependencies. So I'll quickly do npm install. I'll just pause the recording so that it's concise. Now that the npm installation is done, neat and clean, right? Now I'd run npm run dev. And I'll just copy this localhost server and open it here. And I have a nice React app ready here. right? So now I'll just set up my windows a little bit, so I don't have to, switch my window again and again. So just to make it, this is how in the real world you do most of your React development. That's why I wanted to include this aspect here as well in this class as well. So inside of source, you have app.css, app.jsx, right? So one thing when you are writing React components and you are using the Vite as build tool, you need to use .jsx for the files that contains JSX, okay, for React components. Now, one thing I would probably want to do is I would open the solution code pen to problem 1, okay, just to get started quickly. I'll import the solution code pen. I would open it and I would copy all the CSS styles and I would place it in index.css just to keep things very simple and to focus on React. Cool. So yeah, all I've done here is I have copied the app component here from the solution code pen. So here we have the solution code pen and I've pasted it here in app.jsx. Okay, CSS we pasted here in index.css. I will not be needing this React logo, Vite logo, so I'll get rid of it. I would also not need app.css, so I would get rid of it. I just comment out this and save. Yeah, so we have this very basic React component. Basically, we have just ported this first problem statement from CodePen to a real setup, a Vite setup. Cool. Chalo, let's move ahead to the next problem statement, and with every problem statement we'll be moving towards the end result, the end product that we are trying to build. Second thing is we want to handle input and button click. Okay, so go through the problem statement really nicely. So basically what we want is in the app component we want to create a state variable called input value and initialize it as an empty string. Again, introduction to a new concept of creating state. So if you remember from the introduction part of this particular class, that React gives us a way to create a special variable and a way to set the special variable, right, which is called state. And once we include that state or use that state in our UI, React takes care of keeping our UI in sync with the state. We don't have to manually do that anymore. So again, this is the problem. We need to create a state variable called input value and bind this state to the value property of the city search input. Lots of new terms for all of you, which we all will be learning while building this simple thing. And we need to create a function called handle input change that updates the input value state, and attach this function to the on change of the city search input, and it will call another handler. So nice, let me show you a demo that would make a little bit more sense to you. So here if you see in the demo, if I type anything in the input, say a city called maybe Jaipur, okay, and if I hit the search button, you see Jaipur being logged here, and this Jaipur is actually a state that is inside of our application, and we'll see how to do that. Okay, let's see how to do that. let's divide and conquer each problem at a time. So first thing we need is a special variable or a state, right, called input value. So how do we do that in React? So you need a hook or a function called useState. Okay, so what happens is when you invoke useState, you get back an array. Okay, again, why do you get back an array? This was a decision that was taken by the developers, the engineers of the React, right? Key, this is the mechanism, this is the way in which we will allow our developers to create state. Okay, so again, it gives back a variable. That variable is actually an array. Okay, so how do you access the first item of the array? So let's say we want to create a state called input value, and you want to create a function maybe called set input value. Okay, so these two would be super useful, right, to be used in your application, input value and set input value. So the first item of the array would be the input value or the state, a state, and that state can be changed by a function which you get as a second item of the array. So useState kind of manufactures for you or gives you a state as its first item and a setter function as the second item. It gives you back an array. Please see if it makes sense to you. So now in this way you have a state and a setter function, and this is something that's specific to React, and React gives it to you. And there is a better way of doing this with arrays, which is destructuring. So you can literally destructure the array here itself instead of storing it in a variable, and the first item can be stored in a variable called input value. The second can point to the set input value. So this is how you use useState. First of all, you need to import it from React. It comes with React, right? And second, you need to invoke it. Once you invoke useState, you get a pair, an array with two items. One is the state and another is the setter function, right? Now, if you go to the problem statement, friends, initialize the state as an empty string. So the state, let's see what the state is, right? So let's try to use the state. So I have this special variable here, right? So if I console.log the input value, right? Let's see what we get. It's undefined, right? Because we have not initialized it to anything. So let's initialize it with empty string. Right now we see it's an empty string here. And if I initialize it with something else, say VIVK, so you see that Vivek is logged here. And you see this double console logs here, right? That's because of the strict mode. Again, strict mode is a very interesting thing, very interesting mechanism to stop developers from making mistakes, right? And it's out of scope for us to discuss that. So what we would do is, just to make things easier for us, we will just get rid of strict mode for now. Okay, don't worry about what is it. We in the upcoming React batches, we would be, discussing it in depth in our curriculum. So yeah. So you see this Vivek is logged here. So using the use state hook or the function, we get an array. The first item is a state which we can store in any variable. Another is the setter function which can be stored in any variable. Usually we use, suppose this is name, then set name. Age, then set age. This is input value, so we name it set input value. And we initialize it with an empty string. Okay, so we have in this way addressed the first part of the problem statement. So there is another interesting way of, inspecting the state instead of console logging it every time. So as the state changes, I should be able to visually see it, right, as an engineer. So one very interesting and common way of doing that is, we need to write some JavaScript, so curly brackets inside of JSX. Then we do json.stringify and then the input value. Okay, now if I save it, you see that we are able to see our state here. So as I change it and save it, so for example, if I make it viv, save it, you see that state you are able to inspect here. So this will just help us become familiar with this set state thing, right? In React, we like to work with controlled components. So what does it mean by controlled components? Again, I am introducing too many concepts back to back, again, because we need to cover a lot in a very short duration of time. So friends, basically this input, right now it's not controlled, it's uncontrolled. But in React, if its value, what you see inside of it, is tied to a state, and whenever the value of the input changes, like if I type anything to it, it uses this set input value to set the input value, then it totally becomes a controlled component, because this particular input is then controlled by this state input value and the set input value. And how do we do? So we make a control, an input control. We control it using the value. So you can see that I've set its value to whatever the value of input value is. And on every change of this input, we would set the input value to whatever the target value of the input is. Again, this is pure JavaScript. So in event handlers, right, you get this event object, and that has a target, and you can get the current value of that particular input. So this is how we make an input controlled. So the value is controlled by the state input value, and on every change that we make here, it updates the input value. So do you see this? We are setting the input value, this particular state, on every change that happens in this particular input. So let's say if I type viv, so do you see, with every change, every time I'm making any change, so for example, I wrote vivek here. So I change this input value to Vivek. On change, what is happening? Handle input change is being invoked, right? So this event handler, what it's doing is it's setting the input value, the value of this particular special variable, setting the value of input value to whatever the value is of this particular input. So right now it's Vivek, so it changes input value to Vivek. What is the proof? See, we are just printing out the input value state here, right? And we can see that it's totally, tied, very closely tied to the value of this particular input. So if I type Delhi here, then you can see that as the value changes, this particular state also change. So this is how we write controlled components in React. The next piece that we want to solve in this particular problem statement is that whenever this button is clicked, right? Whenever this button is clicked, we want to console log whatever the value of input value is at that moment, right? And that's pretty easy to do. The next bit of problem that we are trying to solve is really interesting. So again, let's look at the end result. So we already have a nice input. So we type anything here, for example, Kolkata, and search it. You see that is logged to the console, right? Now what we need to do is assume that you have an array of the most frequently searched cities, right? Assam, Jammu, Shimla, Srinagar, Chennai, maybe whatever. So you need to create this kind of a list of buttons. And when you click any of them, so when I click on Shimla, you see that the state changes. So this input value, so what I'm doing is, again, this is, slowly and gradually I'm introducing you to the power of React. So what happens is when I click Jammu, it does not directly change the input. We are not doing anything to the input. All we do is we are changing this state using this setter function. We are setting input value using set input value to Jammu. And because this particular input is bound to this variable and setter, so as soon as this state changes, you see that the text that you see, the value of the input that you see also changes. I'll repeat it again because it may be a bit too many things for absolute beginners. So we need to create this list of buttons using React. That's going to be easy. That's going to be declarative. But what the tricky part, not even tricky part, what needs to be done is that whenever Assam is clicked, you see the value of input is also changing. Unlike vanilla JavaScript, when Assam is clicked, I'm not doing anything to this input. I'm not expected to do anything to this input. I need to change the state that this input is tied to. I hope it's making sense to you. And once the state changes, the input will automatically update. The value of input will automatically update. So this is the problem statement, and I'll definitely recommend you to try to do it. I'll just give you a hint that whenever Jammu is clicked, call set input value and set it to Jammu. right? And yeah, from an array, creating this kind of a component from an array, this is something new that let's see how to do it. So let's understand it step by step. Suppose you have a JSX here, maybe, right? And you want to write some JavaScript inside of this JSX land or the HTML land. How do you do that? Like this, right? So inside of this JSX, we want to write some JavaScript. I basically want to write a JavaScript array. For this, I obviously need the curly brackets, right? There is no confusion around that. Now, inside of array can be several elements. For example, I can have a div1, another div2. And you can see that they are just placed side by side. Now there is a line break, I think, because of div. So if I make it maybe span, save it, and now if you inspect it and see, so you have span 1, span 2 side by side. Okay, so this is one thing that you can do, is you can write JavaScript inside JSX. Inside the JavaScript land, there can be an array, and that array can have any number of elements or components or anything. Are you getting where I'm heading towards? So once you have a list, something like this, and you want to display, and don't worry about these pipes, these are done using CSS. So all you need is you need to render all of these buttons. इतने सारे buttons आपको render करने हैं with the text inside of it, Assam, Jammu, Shimla, whatever. And they should have a class called city button, and on click of that particular button, so this particular state set input value should change to the city name. So basically what we are doing here is whenever it is clicked, so we are invoking set input value, we are changing this state, and we are passing it the name. And that was the end result we needed, right? So whenever one of these buttons is clicked, we needed to change the state. Okay. So essentially what is happening here, inside of these suggested cities div, you have a JavaScript land, and inside, what does array.map return? It returns another array, right? So we have another array, right? And for every city, right? So it is looping over all of these cities. So what is the first city it loops over? Is Assam, right? So in the first iteration, you have Assam as the city, right? And we get a button with text city inside of it, then another item in the array, the next city and the next city. Now, and we get a nice array, and they are all rendered side by side. So this is how it works. You see a special property called key here, a special prop called key here. Key is, again, it takes a lot of time to get into depth of it. Basically, whenever you iterate through an array, it is a prop that React internally requires, right? So whenever any item in this array changes, or some sort of sorting or anything happens, so it's like an identifier that for performance reasons it it makes things very, very efficient. So I think that is something, it's kind of mandatory whenever you are using a lot of items in an array, and rendering lots of individual elements for each of the items, then you need this key prop. Again, we won't go into much depth of it, but this is essentially how this entire solution work. I'll just quickly walk you through the entire solution again. So we have an array called suggested cities, right? For every city we need button. So inside of JSX we are looping over suggested cities using .map. In every iteration we get one city, for example Assam. Then we render a button for it. In this way we have buttons for each city, right? So if I inspect it, so I have a button for each city, right? These pipes are coming from CSS. You can see this. It's coming from CSS. So we don't need to worry about it. The next important thing, or the lesson that we learned from this particular exercise, is that what is the importance and utility of a controlled component, right? So in order to change the input value, we never had to touch the input. On click of this button, suggested cities button, we are basically using the setter function to set the state. And because this input is tied to the state, the value of input automatically changes. Very powerful, friends. So basically anything can change this input value. Maybe your current location, where are you right now, that can change this state, right? But it doesn't matter. You don't have to depend too much on the click handler or the click handler of this thing. All you need to do is care about the state. And once the state changes, then there are a lot of things that you can do. Okay, so this is again a very simple example, but it teaches some very core ways in which we think while developing React applications. The problem statement number 4 is really interesting. So you will see this entire app taking a really nice shape, right? So let's see the demo of it, and then let's build it together. Or maybe, because of lack of time, maybe a walkthrough. So when the page loads, right, I'll just reload the page once more for all of you. You see that it's preloaded. The initial state is Assam. And you see that, the current date can be seen here. The current city or the place can be seen here. And there are some real info, right? The current temperature. And these are all happening. We are making a request to a backend service. I'll show you that in a moment. And also if I hit Jammu, you see that I have the current, I'm recording it in almost midnight, morning 3:47. If I hit Srinagar, then it shows the current date, time, Srinagar, and temperature and the weather conditions, right? So it's taking a very, very real shape. The backend service or the API that we are using to get the current weather info, it's openweathermap.org. Okay, so you can just Google for Open Weather Map and you will reach this website in no time. And it has a lot of nice documentation if you go to API. And of course, every backend server has their own, ways. So it's very important to be familiar with the documentation of any backend server that we use. So yeah, let's explore it a little bit. So if I see the API doc for the current weather data, if I see the API doc, so it asks us to make a request to this particular URL, and it needs latitude, longitude, and some app ID. So we need a way to retrieve the app ID. Let's go to API again, and this one call API gives us current weather, forecast, hourly forecast, daily forecast, and all of these very nice data. Then current weather data, this is again something we are using. Currently, we will be needing for the current feature. Again, if you see the API doc, again, it gives a different URLs. It ends with /weather, and it gives you some info and the ways to use it. So yeah, these API documentation are really nice. So सबसे पहले you need to sign in or create an account. I'll create an account. The way of creating an account is really straightforward, and once you create your account, you will get your API key. Okay, from the documentation, it's very clear that we need API key to be able to make the requests to openweathermap.org. They have a very generous free plan, so you can very easily get an API key. And yeah, so there is a very lot of explanation here. I'll really encourage you to go through it, and it gives you sample output, how the output looks like. You can decide whether it's exactly what you need or not, right? So very, very, very important to just play around with the API a little bit and get comfortable with it. And then it's just a matter of making a fetch request, and the data that you receive, just use it in your application. So for example, if you see the output, you get longitude, latitude. You get this icon inside of the weather. You get icon. That is something we are going to use. You see this description, right? Moderate rain. This is again something we'll be using to maybe, show this. Then inside main, you have temperature. And I did a little bit of research and find out that you can set these to centigrades quite easily by sending in, by making query parameters to sending query parameter units to metric. So you will get degrees Celsius in that way. And we need to make second request in order to get other information, but for this particular task, this is more than sufficient. Now let me walk you through the code. By the way, all of these source code can be found in the notes that have been shared with you, right? So the source code can be found here. And we are maintaining two more states here in the app. One is the current weather data, another is loading, and we have set functions for them. Again, these are state. We have some handler functions, handle input change, where we are setting the input value, basically creating controlled component. Handle city search. Here, when we handle city search, it's actually fetching weather based on the input value. Okay, so this is a slight change here. again, when Handel suggested, so when these are changing, again there are multiple ways of doing it. One way would be that the state changes, and whenever the state changes, you do a side effect and you fetch the weather, right? So whenever this state changes input value in any way, we will run a side effect using the use effect hook. That means a state has changed and now I want to create another side effect, and then I can fetch the weather, right? So that is one way. This is again a very simple way that whenever these are being clicked, this changes. And when the page loads, right? So again, they are, in this code, you can see that a call to fetch weather has been made. And what fetch weather does is simply, it makes a fetch request to the URL. Weathers to the open weather map, and once we receive the data, it sets this current data with the data that we have received, and as soon as the fetch weather starts, it sets the loading state to true, and when everything ends, it sets the loading to false. I think I should walk you a little bit more through the use effect. Actually, use effect is one of the hooks that requires the most explanation, right? We usually need an entire class to understand use effect hook in depth, right? So consciously, I'm trying to, not go much into depth of it. So, use effect. So what happens is the component goes through three major life cycles, every component. So it gets mounted, the state changes or updates or re-renders. And so whenever any state changes, right, any state in a component changes, the component actually re-renders, and that happens really quick. And a component unmounts, right? Okay. Again, I'm really going through it really quickly, and I'm very sure you'll be able to find lots of resources related to use effect hook, and just to maintain the length of the workshop, I'm just crossing over it. So use effect hook, when you don't pass any, so when you don't, so what you exactly see here is a dependency array, right? So when you don't pass any second argument to it, any dependency array to it, on each and every renders, on each and every state change of any state, this will be called, which is certainly we don't want here, right? And what empty array does is that this particular function will be invoked only during the first mount. So this particular use effect or these side effects would be only invoked during the mounting because it has an empty dependency array. For example, if I want to fetch weather whenever input value changes, right? So if I pass this here, so now what will happen is on every input change as well, right? The fetch weather would be executed. Okay, so I don't want to do this right now as per the implementation, the very simple and straightforward implementation. And what fetch weather does is it basically makes a fetch request again, nothing to do with React, plain fetch API, and it passes on this. I've created this function to be a bit flexible, so it takes a city. Again, all of this information we get from the API documentation, that you need to send query parameter for city, and you need to pass your API key and units metric for degree centigrade instead of Fahrenheit. Okay, and then when you get the data, you set the current weather data to data. And finally, what you do once you have the data, so once you have the current weather data, which comes from the API in this format, in the JSON format, so then you display all of them, right? So current weather data dot name, right? Current weather data dot, if you see here, weather dot icon. Again, this icon also comes from the Open Weather Map API, and the description here, right? Current weather dot description. Let me quickly show you that here. So we have weather, the first item of the weather array, right? This is the first item of the array. This is an array. This is the first item, so 0, and this is the description, right? So the data dot weather, which is an array, first item of the array, and its description. Again, data main temperature. So data main temperature. So this is how we are able to access all of these data that we get back from the API. Again, this is like pure JavaScript, and we are displaying all of them here in this component, right? And the final part of this puzzle of this problem statement is the forecast feature, right? And friends, I know I'm rushing through it, right? And in case you need a more in-depth explanation or something, feel free to, request it in the comments, and maybe, we'd be happy to create a series of master classes. Why not, right? So again, I told all of you, right? I've already told you that we take entire month to teach React, right? And here I'm trying to, rush through a lot of things in just one short class. So it's really tough for me, friends. Without too many student activities, it's very difficult for me to teach as well. So yeah, if you want to experience Masai School fully, I'll highly encourage you to join one of the cohorts, right? And yeah, if you need some more, in-depth lessons this way, please do let us know in the comments. We'll be very happy to, provide more such lessons. So yeah, the final feature that we want to be building is, and that I want you to walk you through, is the 3-day forecast feature, right? So this particular feature, and it's again quite straightforward. I'll quickly walk you through the code. And friends, yeah, all of the source code is available here. So yeah, we have not, hidden anything from you. You don't have to fill in any form or anything to access the code. It is with you in the Notion document. So yeah, let me walk you through the solution. So for forecast, actually, we will need to make a second API call, and that's one call. And if I see the API doc, so it requires latitude, longitude, and yeah, there's a really nice documentation here. So one thing, if you notice, by the time we did this, right, the previous problem statement, we already had So when we made this particular API request for the last problem statement, in the current weather data, we already have longitude and latitude, right? We saw that. So we can obviously use that information. Once we have it, we can use that information to make the another call, right? So what we are doing here is we have created a separate forecast component, React component, and we have passed in latitude and longitude from the current weather data. Okay, so now what does the forecast component do? Let's see. Again, it has a couple of states. Okay, and whenever the longitude or latitude changes, right, it makes another fetch request, and you see it uses that longitude and latitude. And when we get the response data back, then it sets the forecast data. So here we have a state called forecast data, and this forecast data is set when it starts with null, right? The initial state of forecast data is null or empty. But once a successful fetch request happens and the promise resolves, we set the forecast data, and now we have the data, and you know, we can always loop over it, and you know, we can basically, you know, we can render any number of you know, elements, you know, in so here is JSX. Inside that we have the JavaScript land, and inside JavaScript land dot map returns an array, right? An array of a lot of elements, and array of elements inside of JSX, they get rendered, you know, one next to another. So all of these forecast data, they get rendered one next to another from this line of code. And again, we are doing the same thing. We already have the forecast data. From where did we get the forecast data? After the fetch request, the forecast data was set, successful resolution ke baad, and we are looping through it, and we are storing each line into a variable called day, and then from there we are getting day.date and day.weather.description, and all of these fields we are getting from the forecast data. So yeah, that's pretty much it, friends. I've also put the entire solution in a code sandbox, so that, you know, it's easier for you to explore it and play around with it. So you have the CSS file there, you have the app.js there, right? You have the forecast.js in a separate file there, and weather info. So a little bit more organized. Obviously, there is a lot of scope of improvement and a lot to add on here. But yeah, I think this is a nice way to start learning. This mini project is a nice way of start to learn React. I know we went through a lot of topics in a very, you know, not going too much into depth of them, but hopefully, you know, the notes and the reference materials will help you get familiar with React. Finally, for this background image, what I've done is I have added this image, bottom clouds, right? And then using CSS, I have placed it in the background. Yeah, so this is your entire app here with all the source code for you to play around with and explore React with.